My name's Jordan Van Vost, and I'm the president of the Dharma Friendship Foundation. DFF was established in 1985. Our mission is to sponsor qualified teachers of Buddhist psychology and meditation, to build spiritual community, and to foster the spirit of peace, nonviolence, and compassion in our world. If you're interested in our programs, you can visit our website at dharmafriendship.org, or just come talk to me or one of the other board members after the talk. And could I just ask any past or present board members to please just briefly rise to, so people will know who to talk to. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge that this place where we are having the talk tonight is in the city called Seattle, Washington, is unceded territory of the Duwamish tribe. So while that may bring up a little tension for some of you, maybe you think Buddhism's all about enlightenment and bliss. But I think it's a good starting point because social activism requires us to face uncomfortable and inconvenient truths with a balanced mind. Noting the similarities between Buddhism and indigenous spirituality, the understanding that all life is interdependent, and the wisdom of cultivating compassion for all life, because of our interrelatedness, let us be aware of the struggles of our native brothers and sisters as we strive for universal responsibility in our activism. Seattle is a beehive of social justice movements, and of course, the stakes have never been higher than in 2017. How do we draw upon the wisdom derived from spiritual study and meditation so that movements for social justice are truly transformative? Tonight's speaker is uniquely qualified to answer this question. Dr. Jan Willis is Professor Emerita of Religion at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and Visiting Professor of Religion at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. She has written several books on Tibetan Buddhism and been called influential by Time Magazine, Newsweek, and Ebony. She discovered Dharma as a path to healing the trauma of racism growing up in the segregated South, and has forged paths for the integration of Buddhism and social and political justice. An abbreviated list of her achievements and awards include the following. In December 2000, Willis was named as one of 6 spiritual innovators for the new millennium by Time Magazine. She is the author of Dreaming Me, Black, Baptist, and Buddhist, and scholarly and popular works on Buddhist meditation, hagiography. I hope you tell me what that means. In 2003, she was awarded Wesleyan University's Binswanger Prize for Excellence in Teaching. Please welcome Dr. Jan Willis.
Thank you, Jordan, and thanks for the invitation. Jordan has invited me twice. Now I'm happy about it. This time I was able to accept. I'm coming from 4 days of teaching at Shravasti Abbey. Do some of you know that place? Monastery in your own state with 12 nuns and 2 monks, and led by the abbess, the Venerable Thupten Chodron. I taught Tsongkhapa's 3 principles of the path for the last 4 days and took a plane here this morning. Before I do teachings, I like to bring to mind Nagarjuna's quote. It's from the Bodhisampada Shastra, the Bodhisattva's provisions for traveling the path to liberation. There's a section in that Shastra where Nagarjuna says, how does one tell a true Bodhisattva? And he says, there are 4 ways to tell. A true Bodhisattva, he says, works for Dharma and not for personal material benefit. A true Bodhisattva, you have some friends here who try to get your attention. It's okay. A true bodhisattva works for dharma over fame. A true bodhisattva works for beings, not material happiness or personal happiness, and does all these things in secret. So I try to bring that to mind before I do anything. So I'm very happy to be here to talk a little bit with you about Dharma and activism. Some people see those as two distinct things. Some see the wedding of them as sort of artificial or forced. Oh, it must just be a Western phenomenon. But I don't see it that way at all. When I look at the Buddha's life, I see activism from the very beginning. When the Buddha attained enlightenment under that peepal tree, that Bodhi tree, and was so blissed out for 7 days, and then moved to another tree where he was again blissed out, sat under 7 trees, 49 days, blissed out. And then the Buddha stood up to go and share the teachings that he'd come to see and have insight about. He stood up, and I think from the moment the Buddha stood up, Buddhism was engaged. Buddhism was active. He didn't keep it for himself, otherwise we wouldn't know the term. He decided he'd have to share it. And when he decided there were some people who could understand it and only had a little dust on their eyes, he set out to teach them. Then when you think further about the Buddha's life, his own life, he did some pretty radical things for 6th century BC India. He accepted members into his Sangha from all castes without discriminating. This was definitely a no-no in the Buddha's time. You certainly wouldn't have people eating together from the different castes. For the Buddha, that was not a limitation. He accepted beings from all castes. He accepted women into his Sangha at a time when that was a definite no-no. Do college professors say no-no? He accepted women, and only the Mahavira, founder of Jainism, had done that. And the Buddha, coming from his social class, would have probably known and heard from royalty, such as they were, chieftains, that was not a good thing to do, that society would be ruined if women could leave the household. But sure enough, 5 years after he established his male Sangha, he allowed women to join him. In the forest, men and women, can you imagine? Horrors. That was pretty radical to do. And the Buddha taught to everyone equally, founded a male and female Sangha, and at the end of his life, this is for people who think, who buy the colonial way of thinking of Buddhism, without recognizing it's a colonial myth. Say, well, you know, all those Buddhist monks we see in Laos and Thailand, and Vietnam, and all those places, Malay, those monks do nothing except meditate. Whereas we Christians are about social welfare and this, that, and the other. That's such a colonial claim. And we bought into it. And some of us think, well, you know, the Buddhist monks, they just meditate all the time. But even at the end of his life, the Buddha said, and Jordan got this quote from me, in the Mahavagga Sutta, the Buddha says to his monks, and we would have to say sick nuns, monks and nuns, go forth, O bhikkhu, for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, for the good, for the happiness of gods and men. Let not two of you go by the same way. Preach the doctrine that is beautiful in its beginning, beautiful in its middle, and beautiful in its end. So the Buddha also commissioned his followers to get up on their feet and go and work for the benefit of beings, to preach the Dharma, certainly, but also to work for the benefit of beings. I look at some of those claims by colonialists and I say, but it was to Buddhist monasteries that people went when they were sick. It was to Buddhist monasteries that they went to get their children educated. These were services that the monasteries typically provided, and the monks and the nuns were much more active before the British and the French came and said, we can take over those chores. You go on and meditate. So I asked my students, so I have this habit of saying, oh. Sometimes I hear myself, just did. Oh is just a Tibetan pause. It's sort of, it's a pause that says and, or next. And I also typically say tikaha a lot, which is the Hindi. Okay, okie dokie. Aap tikaha, aap lo tikaha. And the response is tikha. Everything's fine. How are you? I'm fine. So I say tikha also. It's tikaha, stress the ka. Tikha is what it is. I say tikaha. That's just moving right along. So if I'm thinking Sanskrit and if I'm thinking Tibetan, I say, oh, sorry. I heard myself. I asked my students, I asked them to decide for themselves, what will you carry with you from this class when you no longer remember the names and the dates, What will you carry with you as a key teaching of Buddhism? And of course, they mentioned the Four Noble Truths, what the Buddha taught in the first discourse he gave, the middle path. Of course, they might not be clear on what the middle path is and how it changed over time, but they remember that rubric. They also remember the Eightfold Noble Path. Okay, and I tell them, well, there's also, you can remember, there are all these numbers, right? Because it was an oral tradition passed on for centuries, before written down. So there are a lot of numerical quotations, When the Buddha was asked at age 80, what he had been teaching all those 45 years previously. He said, I've only taught two things. I've taught suffering and the end of suffering. I want to say yippee, but anyway, if you missed the second part, you missed it. He taught the end of it too. And in Dhammapada, there are some verses that are quite good. And I'm going to be talking about Martin Luther King tonight, and Martin Luther King studied a little Buddhism himself. Of course, he studied Gandhi, and he went to India eventually, but he also he took some Buddhism courses. It's a known fact. And some of the Buddhist quotes, I think, are echoed in some of King's work. For example, Dhammapada 5, verse 5 says, hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is only appeased by love. This is an eternal law. Eternal law there is the word Dhamma. This is the Dhamma. Hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is only appeased by love. And when King says someone has to take the first step, there are all these wars. Will someone take the first step to say no to war? I like to think of the Dharma in a nutshell by thinking of another Dhammapada verse, which the nuns at Shravasti Abbey sing every morning, chant every morning. And that verse is verse 183. where it says, do no harm, practice good, discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. Do no harm, practice good, discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. But I heard certain principles that are talked about in Buddhism. I heard them first from Dr. King. Because I come to you from Birmingham, Alabama. Actually, from a mining camp outside of Birmingham, Alabama, where I began school in the year 1954. Do you know the year versus Brown v. Board of Education? I began school that year. And yet, that was the year when the Supreme Court said, sure enough, they finally came around to saying, separate but equal is not equal. About time. Look at Plessy versus Ferguson again and say that's not equal. And yet, 11 years later, when I graduated high school, for 3 years I had been bused 7 miles every day to go to an all-black county school. I graduated from an all-black high school, even though there was a perfectly good high school in the mining camp of Docena. But the Alabama Supreme Court, as soon as Brown v. Board of Education was, took effect, didn't take effect in many southern states. It didn't take effect in Alabama. And so in order to prevent the federal law from going into effect, we black kids were bused to make sure we continued at all black schools. And at my school, at elementary school in the mining camp, I didn't know what public meant. I didn't know that public meant you get your books. I didn't know that there were libraries in schools that were staffed, by the school boards. Because my parents had to take off a day or 2 days and stand in lines that went around blocks in order to buy us secondhand books so we'd have books to study from. So, we had hand-me-down desks and hand-me-down books, and yet once a year, or maybe twice a year, we were asked to stand and recite something for the visiting white superintendent. It was not a very pleasant thing. I grew up in the Jim Crow South where the water fountains were marked, white and colored, where your parents tried to teach you so that you would be safe. Don't cross the street early, not one step early. You wait till you get over here to cross that street. I lived in the mining camp, as I said. There was one road into it. If you kept going straight, you went into the white section, and if you turned right, you went into the black section, and you were taught on fear of your life, don't go straight. A Klan area leader lived in Docena, Tikaha. So I tell you all this horrible stuff, Kids were traumatized, it was a frightening thing. But the good part of it, we had great teachers. We had a dual education. We learned English lit and African American lit. We learned this kind of art and African American art. We learned the national anthem and we learned the Negro national anthem. When I meet blacks my age, we can begin reciting a Lawrence Dunbar poem and we can hit the same gestures at exactly the same time. It was a uniform African American curriculum. So that was great. This dual education had really dedicated teachers. And the other thing that was great was that when I was a 10th grader, we kids got to march with King in his Birmingham campaign. He decided it's time to put the children in the march and put them in the forefront. Oh, people who were in his inner circle said, this could be dangerous, Martin. You might not want to do this. But Martin took the chance, and it worked. Oh, I think it worked. We were tremendously happy. I mean, high schoolers all over Birmingham, black high schoolers, you know. Oh, the bus drivers would come to the school, open the door wide, honk the horn, and say, downtown, going downtown. And we kids would pile onto the buses and get driven downtown. The Birmingham campaign lasted through April and part of May. Oh. And children, people are joyous. That's good. We rejoice. We piled onto those buses and we marched in twos. The buses put us out at the 16th Street Baptist Church, which is another reason that church was targeted. And inside that church, you should know that black women, King gets all the credit, but you know, there are lots of women standing behind King, and I need to make that clear. And one of the first things those women did was they checked us out to see if we could march. Not just anybody who showed up could march. For example, if you were angry that day, you couldn't go. And these black women elders would test us, you know. They'd come over, John, you ready to march? And John said, yes, ma'am. And they'd say, well, John, I'm not so sure. Maybe you ought to sit over there and work on your Sunday school lesson, boy. And John couldn't march, because John was a little too angry to go out there and march. So what I'm trying to say is there were strict rules. I mean, he wanted the children in the forefront. He wanted the conscience of America to see that. He could have predicted that Bull Connor would bring out the hoses and the dogs. And he wanted the rest, and we did too. We children knew it wasn't just about Emmett Till, 1955 after Brown v. Board of Education. It wasn't just that one case. Children were under attack all over the South. I used to complain, you know, why do we have to have the windows up? You know, as we had this little car and was always at least 10 years older than the time, but you know, we would go out, we'd dress up on Sunday and we'd go driving around. You know, it was a nice family. We had to have the windows up. And it's the South, we'd be sweating, you know, and I'd always complain, Mama, how come we have to have the windows up? And once she turned, she would just say, be quiet, most of the time. But once she said, because mean black men want to do you harm. And we knew people who, when cars were at stop signs and a carload of segregationists, you know, rolled upside it, they would throw through the windows if the window were down. Hot lye and acid. These are things the nation didn't know about. But Emmett then praised his mother for keeping the casket open. He wasn't alone. Children were under. I've met people who say, my parents sent me from Montgomery up here to Birmingham because they thought it would be safer for me to go to school here. It was incredible what black parents had to deal with. So we marched. And that was a wonderful thing, because all the deaths hadn't begun, the assassinations hadn't begun. We felt really hopeful. We felt really triumphant. We felt really a part of a struggle. But don't forget, you were allowed to march because you would be cool, because you wouldn't return hate for hate, because you'd march calmly, that you are committed to no harm, to give no harm back, to receive only. Oh. So those marches were great. We filled up the jails. I was always jealous I didn't get that badge. I didn't get arrested. But I was there every day I could be for the 6 weeks campaign Oh, and sometimes we went with our parents. The parents were off. We marched. I once went with my father on the day that the famous photograph was taken in Birmingham. Now, this is impossible, but I'll try it. This is a famous photograph of the Birmingham campaign, the dogs. I've often had the discussion with my father because, you see, we were the next two people coming up behind that man. And I say to my father, Dad, we were right there. We were right there. This man was in front of us. And you see, they sicked the dogs on him. And this man had a little knife, pocket knife, in his back pocket. And he got it, and they couldn't stand it. Because to resist was a crime. Still is, right? Driving while black, walking while black. They're crimes. You didn't know these were crimes? So once this man pulled out his knife and swung at one of the dogs, they closed in on him and beat him right in front of us and took him off, face down, legs up in the air, hands up in the air. I asked my father, I said, Dad, we were right there, but we aren't in any of those pictures. And he says, yes, daughter, I know, we were right there. He said, but then we didn't go to have our pictures taken. Okay, Deacon Dad. We didn't go to have our pictures taken. I know. So that was great. Oh, that was a great time. We were very jubilant. We thought, we have a chance here. We're going to win this. And the next year, there was a victory. There was the Civil Rights Bill. Passed the next year. Incredible. Oh, but now keep the focus on 63 for just a little longer. In 63, in Birmingham, April and May, the Birmingham campaign, King called Birmingham, and he was, right, he'd been in Montgomery, the bus boycott and so forth. He called Birmingham the most segregated city in the South. We need to have the campaign there. I want children to march. So he made these kinds of decisions. We happily went along. All the brutality showed on TV. This was great. Okay. In August of 63, there's the March on Washington. In September of 63, there's the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. Children had always been under attack. At 9:30, it's always Sunday school. In that point in the church, there's always Sunday school. The people who bombed that church knew it. They knew it. And that was a kind of seething anger. Since we had the audacity to march and to keep marching against Bull Connor's dogs and his water hoses. And some people just couldn't stand it. To God. And then the U.S. went through a period, I don't have to tell you these histories, but soon, then November, there was the King assassination. Then there was the Malcolm assassination. Then there was the Robert Kennedy assassination. And then there was Martin's assassination. And for a time, this country, people my age, felt a little hopeless. Felt a little, can this really be happening? And whenever I'm called upon to say anything about a period of hopelessness, I say, please, just do something. Don't just sit there. Do something, anything. You'll find you have a friend alongside you pretty soon. And it grows. Oh, I think this is why religious traditions prosper according to their rituals. The amount that people have something to do. Oh, it's very positive. To God. So things that I heard from King and from from reading King's sermons, which I do. I keep with me, usually when I travel, the Bodhicharya Avatar by Shantideva, the Buddhist poem of the 8th century that's so wonderful on compassion, and this series of sermons by Martin Luther King called The Strength to Love. Bodhisattvas have to be what? Courageous and brave. The strength to love. In these sermons, I hear Buddhist principles, the Buddhist principles of non-harm, of compassion, of interdependence, of the beloved community, still being striven for. And I heard that, so when I discovered Buddhism, it was like hearing this again. Buddhism, those principles didn't seem new to me. There was this moment of recognition. Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know this stuff. Because we kids had been taught it back in Birmingham, So I liked what I saw. Then I went north to school. This has turned into more of a personal story than I thought it was when I first started. Does anybody need me to stop telling stories now? Okay, thank you. So then I went away to Cornell. I won scholarships. And a thing that you shouldn't be in the South, especially when the Klan area chief lived in your mining camp, was conspicuous. And I don't know. I liked math, I liked some things, I got some scholarship offers, and it made the black newspaper, 4 sheets of it. And the Klan came to our house. And my dad, who remembers the day he started work in the steel plant, and see all the other men in that camp were out of work because the mine closed when I was about 2. All the black people had been taken off by Klansmen, the black men, they were sat on their porches, sort of. But my father worked in steel plant. At any rate, what do I want to tell you about this? I don't know. My father was away at work when the Klan came. And my mother stood by the door. My mother's smaller than I am. She was. And she had a .22 pistol. You know, one of those shaped like this? I don't know what you call them. Little, looked like it. I remember it had ivory handles, a tiny little gun. She stood by the door. She was gonna guard her 2 daughters. And these folk, like now, this isn't over with. Sorry to say. In some areas of the country still happens, but 10, 15 cars came through the camp, rode all around the camp, honking their horns. And in those days, that meant that somebody was a target. Nobody knew who yet. And then they slowly, the horns, the cars, the trucks, pulled up in front of our house. And then across the street from our house, they set up a big cross and they lit it. Now my mother's standing at the door with the .22 because in those days, we expected somebody was going to throw a bomb at the house. They were at places where King stayed, the hotel where he stayed when he was in town, his Shuttleworth house, who was one of the people helping with the Birmingham campaign. He was a local preacher, and they bombed his house. So we expected a bomb might happen, it might be thrown. And my mother was telling the 2 girls, 2 of us, to get down. And I remember that I was, absolutely in awe, terrified, but in awe, that there were men, women, and children in that crowd. And they all had on robes. And I couldn't take my eyes. I was looking out the window, and my mother was trying to get us to get down, get by the bed, get under the bed if we could. And I was just amazed. There were little kids in little Klan suits. And they weren't all white. Some were red, some were purple, some were white. And I felt this strong impulse to go out and tell them, you know, I was, I guess, 15, maybe 16, to tell them that they were making a mistake, that we were a family here, just like they were family. We're a family too. You got your kids out there? We are a family just like you. Surely you can't mean this. By virtue of what do you mean it? Fortunately, we were spared that night, because after some mumbo jumbo, I call it, and a burning flag, all these folk got back in their cars and trucks and rode off. And it was something that we told our father about when he came in the next morning. Happy to be alive. Tika. So I feel like a little like church now. You know, can I get a witness? And I say, I'm a witness. You know, I didn't make it up. It's unbelievable, but I didn't make it up. So now we apparently live in a post-racial society. I mean, after all, what are you complaining about? We've had a black president, for Christ's sake. Saw the complexity of things. Like the Atlantic ad that showed his picture really looking good, and then at the bottom of the caption was, "You're gonna miss me?" Oh yeah. Miss you, Obama. But 8 years of an African-American president, people couldn't stand it. Some people just couldn't stand it. They couldn't abide it. They just couldn't abide it. Post-racial, huh? So then we get the president we have now. No woman president. Not a chance. You're not going to have an African-American man and then have a woman in the White House. The time is not ripe. There was too much anger. Too much anger from a Congress as well who said we'll say no to absolutely everything he proposes. So that was a wonderful blip. He did lots of things against everybody's, without any help. Did amazing things. But just as, to me, my analysis of it is, just as there was this seething hatred which came up in September at the bombing of that 16th Street Baptist Church, Trump was almost inevitable after 8 years of a black man in the White House. One last point I wanted to make here was about, you may have heard of Brian Stevenson, Just Mercy. There are now there are also any number of places I could point and say there's work going. This is the hopeful part. There are things being done. There's a lot that needs to be done. Criminal justice is definitely one of the things that needs to be done. Luckily, there are cameras on phones, so that things that black people have been saying forever, one can now witness. There was just a documentary, is it 20 years after LA, and the Rodney King beating? But now there are more and more videos of these brutal assaults taking place. But they're captured in film. That's a good thing. I'm not very good at technology, but that's a good thing. Tika. So I have had occasion to write about the Dharma and Lives Matter movement, about prison reform or the criminal justice system, and to think about it. And so to read a number of things like Just Mercy, to read, I'll just suggest a few, to read, if you would, if you haven't so far, read Carol Anderson's White Rage. There she talks about, I think she's a historian at Emory, African-American woman. She talks about the federal policies that meet advances for people of color. When there are advances, like the Civil Rights Act, what happens at the federal level that pushes back against that? And she begins with slavery, as anybody ought to. I was just saying today, the 13th Amendment, which freed slaves. If you ever read that closely, there's a documentary on the 13th, right? The 13th Amendment says the slaves are freed, except they be judged criminal. Except they be judged criminal. It's in those two sentences of the 13th Amendment. It says all slaves are freed, except they be judged criminal. So it makes perfectly good sense that after slavery was abolished, we started having not only the Klan, but we started having the prison industrial complex right away, because you just can't have former slaves thinking they're free. Just can't have it. And you also can't all of a sudden lose your labor force. You can't lose that labor force. You have to have people who work for you for free. And if they aren't slaves anymore, they can at least be prisoners. Angela Davis used to come in when she taught at Santa Cruz. She used to come into the building and she'd be giving a talk like this, and she'd point at the various things. She said, this table, prison labor. This chair, prison labor. Every stick of furniture in the UC system was made by prison labor. She points that out. I cheer her on. She points it out. The reason you can sit here is because prisoners made this. It's still true. It's still true. There's plenty of work left to be done. There's a great book by Debbie Irvin called Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race. Boston Brahmin girl. It's a humorous book in many places. She said, I used to ask my mom, can I play the Indian in the cowboy and Indian thing? Mom said, no, you don't want to be on that side. What's the matter with Indians, Mom? And the mom told her half-truths, and when she got older, she could see they were half-truths. What's the matter with Indians, Mom? They drank too much, the mom said. They didn't say we gave them the booze. Said they drank too much. You don't want to play Indians. Anyway, Debbie Irvin's is a great book for actually taking one through the process of, having it dawn on you what white privilege is about. Many books on white privilege, from Tim Weiss to Rosenberg to lots of books there. But it's good, because often in a room this size, if there were one or two blacks, they would be expected to tell you how blacks feel, which is totally unfair. Better, you ask, how it feels to be white. That's what needs analysis. I didn't hear a comment there. That's what needs to be analyzed. How does it feel to be white in this society? You say, it doesn't feel like anything. It's just the norm, You look in the mirror, you might be, there's a gray hair, We look in the mirror and might wonder what's coming at us today in these parallel universes we live in. So people who are doing work with white privilege, I think, are doing really good work. That's the way it ought to be done. Whites should educate whites. If you've seen James Baldwin's I Am Not Your Negro, anybody? It's available on DVD. You know that he doesn't say, I'm not your Negro, right? He says, I'm not your N-word, right? But he says so eloquently, you see, I know perfectly well who I am. But you have created this in, and therefore, it is up to you to figure out why. Chikaha. I think we need to talk to each other, but I think at first we need to talk amongst ourselves and then come back together. Now you say, what happened to the Dharma part of this talk? I think the Dharma gives us a way to talk in safe spaces, even, if you will, even spaces that have sanctity, about issues that are really hard, challenging issues. I've written pieces in the last 10 years that say, you know, we have this incredible method. You know, we know how to meditate. Why don't we focus those skills on issues like race and racism, and you can see it clearly, what it is, what its origins are, how to end it maybe. We get really creative. I think there's a chance for us to at least honestly look at it. I think we have a proper vehicle that can hold it. And I think if we don't, that's really a cop-out. You know, we have a chance to talk about this difficult stuff and to help each other with it. Oh, so for 2 decades I've been reading Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatar. You know, that marvelous text on bodhicitta, on compassion. And the more I read it, the more it becomes clear that suffering is all of a piece. It's not my suffering and your suffering. We really are all in this together. We're in this together. We'll only get free together. So that's what I think when I think Dharma and activism. Part of me wants to go, yippee, again. We can do this. Oh, or a little Obama, yes we can. Yes we can. But we have to be brave enough to say, okay, it's hard work, but we have to be brave enough, and we can. Not to try it is to turn away. And if anything, if we learn anything about the Buddhist path, it's to not turn away from suffering. Not turn away. There's a clock there. I just saw there's a clock there. I think I've gone over my time. At any rate, I think I'd like to stop and engage with you. If you have questions or comments, I'd appreciate talking with you. So what did I end with? Yes, we can? Sí se puede. Yeah, sí se puede.
The Dharma Friendship Foundation students were taught that Buddhism is non-proselytizing. So I didn't disagree with anything you said, but I was interested to hear you explain about Buddha sent the Sangha out to spread the Dharma and help people in their various situations, but that seemed to me like a contradiction.
It is.
Okay.
But in the Buddhist scriptures, the Buddha sent his disciples out to help beings where they found them.
Right.
But that gets lopped off by people who want to, I think, oh, you have a Buddhist center, you want to sort of keep it nice, and I've had people tell me, but the Buddha didn't proselytize. And I say, well, you know, and you can quote him this, yeah, it seems like he might have. He didn't say you had to convert them to Buddhism, but you should at least teach them about it. And they also did other good deeds for the welfare of beings.
Right.
So I think they're mistaken when they say didn't proselytize.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. About Obama, it was like, oh, that I don't remember exactly about his being a professor at constitutional law, or constitutional history, whatever. But it was like, oh, finally we have somebody who's just the sort of person we should have for president. It was like, oh.
I mean, Biden said he's so clean. And he's articulate too. Of course, he regretted saying that, I'm sure.
People magazine, the cover has the Obamas on the cover, and it's just the most amazing picture because, of course, they've never been shown this way. While he was in office, it shows them as on top, just having fun, successful, all that stuff that wasn't supposed to be shown while he was in office. And they just look like they're having the time of their lives.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. I didn't know it. I haven't seen that. I've been in retreat. My fro used to come in the room before you saw me. Now, this isn't the big fro, but this is me with Lama Yeshe on Lama Yeshe's first visit to the States. I'm sorry, I have to pass this picture around. This is sometime later, I don't know, a second or third visit back to the monastery where I spent a year with 60 Tibetans. I was the only Westerner at the time.
I just wanted to know how you ended up from Alabama, then you went to Cornell, and then how
Buddhism.
To Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. I got scholarships to Cornell and to a number of other places, and then the cross burning. And I decided to go to Cornell, and my father, who regretted until his death that he couldn't afford or didn't even think as big as to send me on a plane. I tried to say, oh, Dad, don't have that regret. Everything worked out fine. Oh, but I took a bus. It took about a day and a half, a bus from Birmingham to Ithaca, New York. And I couldn't eat at any of the restaurants where the bus stopped until we got to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Then I could go in and have some food. So my father was sad that I had to go through that, but that was okay. I made it there fine. Of course, oh yeah, you don't need all those details. So I got to Cornell, and the people who became my friends were people who were card-carrying SDS members, Students for a Democratic Society, who wanted to know, they wanted to interrogate me. Is it really as bad as we think in the South? And you know, I didn't really, oh please. I was really shy and a little scared, you know. Oh. And I ended up majoring in philosophy, and that was great. I worked with Norman Malcolm and fell in love with Wittgenstein, and I thought, I like the way this guy thinks, you know. And we only had to write one, we had to go to all our classes and write a paper at the end of the semester. And Norman Malcolm liked the way I wrote. He was a good teacher, he encouraged me. Norman Malcolm was one of Ludwig Wittgenstein's first American students. So back at Cornell, he was the man teaching analytic philosophy, and I fell in love with analytic philosophy. Anyway, and Norman Malcolm's son was a Buddhist, but Nichiren Shoshu Buddhist. And Malcolm wanted to know about this Buddhism thing, but I got into Buddhism because the Vietnam War was going on, and because my political friends were, you know, on hunger strikes or something. And I'm saying, you know, because we had only 3 networks, and there was network news every evening, and the news started with showing body bags. And then big number in white usually, 637 GIs lost today. And then the news would start, right? So every day we got a body count from the war in Vietnam, American body count. But we also got to see on the news the new weapons we were trying out there. So this is the new barrel bomb, this is the new napalm, this is the new, so it was horrific, you know? So I tried to find out who in the world are these Vietnamese folk? And how are they surviving it? How are they surviving? And I found out that except for the 5% that the US was propping up, the 5% Catholics, the 95% of them were Buddhist. So I started reading Buddhism. Because this was one of, Tika, 2 parts to this answer. I started reading about Buddhism. The only books available that were accessible to me then were books by Alan Watts and books by D.T. Suzuki. 60s. All these Zen books, you know, Zen. So I determined at some point, you know, one day I'm going to go to Japan, I'm going to go to the far north, I'm going to get lost, I'm going to wear only black, and I'm going to meditate until I attain enlightenment. So then this opportunity came up by the time I was about to be a junior. The Wisconsin University program, college year in India, had started the year before, and so it started in 66, 67. In 67, 68, I got a chance to go on that program. And I went on the program because I thought, well, I'll use the round the world ticket they give you on Pan Am. I'm not really interested in stopping in India, but I can go on to Japan if I take this. People convinced me, my professors, my friends, take the trip, Jan, it'll be good for you, you know, take a trip. You get to meet some actual Buddhists. So those of us doing philosophy and other humanities studies, we went to Benares, 9 of us went to Benares. 10 went to New Delhi, those people doing social sciences, and some people went to Osmania University and studied Telugu. They wanted to do Southern India studies. So I was in a class with 7 Thai monks and me, that was it. And the professor who liked Wittgenstein. Go figure, you know, it was like, maybe there's something to karma. So I'm in this class with these 7 Thai monks, and they were the sweetest folk, you know. They would say, "Oh, Jan, we think you would like this book." And they throw it and step back because they're Thai, they're Theravada monks, they can't touch a woman. "We think you'd like this book." Now later, those same 2 of those 7 monks I met, and they introduced us to their abbot in Bodh Gaya, and they showed us our first meditation instructions. I went back with 2 friends, and so that all worked out fine. But after class, you know, after the monks repeated everything they'd heard the professor say, and he and I both await the question, and then they'd say it all by rote, and then they'd say, "Thank you so much," and sit down. Well, then, because they just wanted to get it right, what he'd said. And then the professor and I would walk through this gorgeous campus of Benares Hindu University and talk about Wittgenstein. But in Benares, I found out there were 7 kilometers outside of Sarnath. And so I would go with rickshawwalas, from whom I learned Bhojpuri, a dialect of Hindi. And we would travel out to Sarnath, where Tibetans where Buddhists from various traditions were coming back to this pilgrimage site, Sarnath, where the Buddha taught the first sermon, and there were a lot of Tibetans there. And I met the Tibetans, fell in love with them. After being in the largest village in all of India, Benares, Varanasi, I met the Tibetans at Sarnath, and I really liked them. And then, bong, I said, now these people, they've been kicked out of their country. And they are so joyous and so happy. I want to find out how. And they just took me right in. And I went there as often as I could. Then after Guns on, does anybody know about Guns on Campus at Cornell? I was there as a senior. That's when I got my fro. That's when I learned how to shoot a weapon, though I was scared all the time. Oh, I was Minister of Women's Defense. That's when we would give those titles, Minister this, Minister that. I was the only senior woman. There were 7 men. There were just 8 of us in my class at Cornell. So when I went back at the end of college, and I was making this decision I mentioned at dinner, whether to join the Black Panthers or to accept the invitation to spend time in that Tibetan monastery, which had happened at the end of my junior year, I went across country to join the Panthers, and just got more afraid and heard that there were some discouraging things about the Panthers. And I decided to go back to Nepal, where this invitation has come from. And so I went back and stayed at a monastery with 60 monks. And every morning I got up and I sang with them, with the little lamalas, 18 of us against the wall, you know, almost davening, but we're and one day I was late. And when I was late, I heard them, and that's how I learned Tibetan. Because Tibetan is monosyllabic language. Each of the syllables means something. But if you learn the chants, you know how to connect the syllables. Also, it's 2, 2, 2, 3. The last 3 syllables is a name. Well, I was late, so then I intuited that's what they're doing. They're learning how to connect the syllables. Why Tibetan grammar books don't just say count the syllables, see if you can do it this way, see if you can do it that way, none of them do. But anyway, I learned Tibetan that way, and I met Lama Yeshe. When 2 men came to the house of a friend, said, "What are you up to?" I said, "We're looking for a teacher." He said, "I've only heard of 2, but they're supposed to be really good. The first is Lama Thupten Yeshe, and that was all I heard. When I heard Lama Thupten Yeshe, literally my hair stood on me. I felt like I was in an electric field. I felt very happy. And when I went later there with 2 of my friends, we met Lama Yeshe. Oh, has anybody read any of Lama Yeshe stuff? Some of you have met Lama Yeshe. Somebody's met Lama Yeshe here. Pam? Yeah, okay. Oh, when I first arrived at Kopan, Zena came out. "Oh, you want to meet the lamas? Too bad. Too bad they're tired, you can't see them." But she fed us lunch. Matala! And she made us lunch. And then she said, "Time for you to go now." And we were on our way out. We were feeling really sad. We'd walked up and we couldn't meet him. And then this door on the edge opened up and a little hand said, I couldn't make this stuff up. And that was Lama Yeshe. And Lama Yeshe said, "Hello, I'm so glad you are here, dear. I'm so glad you have come." And that was it. He became our teacher, Lama Thupten Yeshe. There are many more stories, but. So I'll tell you one other thing, because our time is running out. When I met Lama Yeshe, I was like Milarepa. People had told me for so long that I was unworthy, you know, that my self-esteem was lower than on the ground, right? And so the other side of that is sort of an arrogance, you know? I thought I was smart. Oh, even though people called me all sorts of names starting with the N-word, from little dirty, stringy blonde hair, full of mud on the diapers. I'm 9 years old. "Where are you going, you dirty?" Oh, but you internalize some of that stuff. So by the time I got to Lama Yeshe, one day I was just sitting there against the wall, Lama Yeshe comes out with a towel. He's on the way to the bathrooms on the other side of the house here. He looks over at me and said, yes, dear. Yes, dear. Pride and humility is tough. Goes on and brushes his teeth. Had me diagnosed perfectly. All I wanted to know from Tibetans, Vietnamese, whoever could teach me, how do you remain humble? How do you have some humility, but you have some dignity too? You can stand tall. Still be kind, but stand tall. That's all I wanted to know. So when he was just brushing his teeth, pride and humility, yes dear, he's a tough problem. So what did he do? He spent 15 years building my confidence. 15 years. Once Lama Yeshe and some others of us were talking, and Lama Yeshe did this. And I said, what's the matter? Because I always thought there was a problem. What's the matter, Lama? Was it something I said? And he said, no, dear. I say one thing, you think 5. I said again, is that bad? He says, no, it means you're quick. It means you're quick. So sometimes over the next few years, we'd be in crowds of groups, and some conversation was going on, and Lama Yeshe would say, he just gave me confidence. Because at your core, dear, you are infinitely compassionate already and wise. You have everything you need. Go out, show that to the world. Be strong. That was all from Lama Yeshe. So I'm really glad. Sometimes I think Lama Yeshe just reeled me in, I had nothing at all to do with it. But I'm so glad that I met the Dharma through him, because he's so kind, so kind. Okay. Other questions?
So I just want to say Philosophical Investigations was one of my favorite books in college.
Good.
So it's so great to hear you say that you like Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
I see and I read and I hear a lot of anger about race online and in my life. But I also have heard that anger has no place in Buddhism. But a lot of the anger that I see in our modern world seems very justified, almost necessary. And so I'm wondering what role that has.
Both Martin Luther King and the Buddha begin with do no harm. Ahimsa, it's a real thing. Shantideva, all the good accrued in aeons of lifetimes. 1 second of anger destroys. Buddhists teach that anger is always associated with hatred, and hatred is always the wish to harm, so that's never good. So righteous anger, is there such a thing? As a beginning point, something catches your attention, makes you angry when this is unbelievable, you have to do something, fine. But don't let that continue to be the motivating force. Otherwise, you burn out a lot quicker. Better to do it for those that you can now feel such compassion for. Let that fuel your struggle. You will get so much further if love and compassion fuel the struggle. I think you'll get further. So I can see it being an impetus, but I can't see it being sustaining. Anger causes too much harm to ourselves. It's very toxic. It's very painful. If anyone has ever been really angry, do you know the feelings that generate it? It's terrible. You can't sleep, you can't concentrate, you can't eat, you shake, you sweat, you have all these angry thoughts. It's not good. It doesn't feel good. Oh. It's hard to do, and I'm thrilled you like philosophical investigations. Yes?
How did your dad handle it? next day when he found out that the Klan had been around?
My dad knew that the Klan was there. He didn't, go and look for the white leader, No. He just checked with us that we were okay, We were as okay as we could be, kids, Yeah, but my father did a lot of things that I'm so proud of him for. To be a member of the NAACP, you could get picked up by the Klan in those days. And he was a member, My father was the youngest deacon in his church, and he was also the one people came to for advice on voting and other kinds of things. So I was always proud of him. He had to live with that, though, that we were attacked and he wasn't there. He had to keep a job because he had to keep us fed. Yeah, good man. I used to wonder why the parents couldn't do things for their kids, couldn't protect their kids better. That used to make me angry when I was a little kid. My sister and I went to a birthday party once, and the Klan came in robes to say this was too much noise, too much joyful noise in the black community. What was going on? And so, it's a birthday party for this kid. They went and got the kid out of the house. And I'm thinking, why can't his parents help? But his parents couldn't help. It's unbelievable. This was my life. Oh.
You have to acknowledge that it was you that got you to Asia and subsequently to Loma Yeshe.
I guess I had some determination.
Agency.
Yeah, I had some agency. Yeah, I won't deny that, yeah. But sometimes it does feel like you just reeled me in.
My question had to do with the tension between the need to work on yourself, to be honest with yourself, to be introspective, the tension between that and how do you know you're taking right action when you act in the world? How do you take action before you're finished?
I think it's good if you have a practice.
Yeah.
And it's good if part of that practice is developing calm and insight. When Kent State went down, I was in Dharamsala. I went to see His Holiness. His Holiness really wanted to know what college students thought about what was happening on college campus. Told them as best we could. And he said, your problem is, you can see our problem, gonna get back to the States, we felt like we weren't part of the action, He gave us a long, calming talk on, you've embarked on the Buddhist path. It would be good if you could, in your practice, develop clarity and calm. So that you knew when you made a choice that you had deliberated. You didn't just rashly join. But, he said, if you've chosen this group, meaning these students here, and this police force here, and it occurs to you, now that you've started this Buddhist path, and it occurs to you to call those policemen, you must let them kill you, he said. Really? You must let them kill you. If you call them some derogatory term, then you're not ready to have been there. But if you can calmly say, in order to protect these, I will stop you, and you wish them happy, good rebirth, you stop them. His Holiness said, 1970, and he said, don't think you have to wait for the far-off future to help beings. You help when you can. I'm not saying it was tempered by, be calm, be deliberative, Try to be creative. Do your best to make a clear decision. When you make it, don't have anger or hatred motivated. Don't call them a pig. If you do, just drop whatever you have, let them kill you. But if you can calmly do it, stop them. I should say something hopeful. When I go back to yes, we can. There is so much happening with 45. People say, you don't have to say the name. With 45, it's getting worse. In Atlanta, people are being rounded up. Immigrants are being rounded up daily. I'm sure it's not just in Atlanta. So we have to be vigilant, do what we can, be creative, do positive things, bring attention to things, non-violently. But there's much work to be done. And then rejuvenate yourselves from time to time. Give yourself a day off. Thich Nhat Hanh wouldn't let people work for him unless they agreed that 1 day out of 7 they would take just for themselves. That was part of membership. You have to take care of yourself. I'm so happy to see all of you here. It's great for me to look out and see your faces. If there are any other questions?
I bring Tashi Delay to you from Lobsang Chonjur.
Lobsang Chonjur? Wow, really?
So
from Mexico? Where?
No, Berkeley now. So,
Berkeley.
Well, and I'll give you his contact.
Please do.
So he was so excited when he heard that I was going to come and hear you.
Amazing.
So,
Small world. Thank you so much. Please give me the contact. Okay. When I first went to stay with the 60 lamas in that monastery, I was put in meeting. Oh, John Willis. No, I said, Losang Chujur, India. India? But we've been writing all year and I've come to study, and he invited me. Losang Chujur, India. Then, one of those pictures that was going around showed a monk and myself standing there and 2 little lamalas on the side. And then I said, oh, I'm Jan Willis. He told me, Jan Willis, Losang Chujurum. Jan Willis, Losang Chujurum. Put me in that 4.5-foot bed, tin roof, monkeys on the ceiling. I didn't know any language then to ask them what the heck's happening at night. No wonder our parents worry. No wonder they worry. I was scared to death till I saw monkeys making those screeching sounds. Screech monkeys. They jumped on my roof every night. It was Losang Chujur's roof. He's at Berkeley?
he's actually in a little town next door to Berkeley called El Cerrito.
Fantastic. Incredible. Thank you so much.